going on, everybody? Dev Del Molino here, the synthesizer of opinions, back with another review. Today we're doing a 65432 on the latest and potentially greatest Big K.R.I.T album, Forever Is a Mighty Long Time. 65432, 6 minutes to tell you guys 5 things to know about the album and the artist before we get started, 4 favorite tracks off of the album, 3 adjectives to describe this album, and finally being left with 2 options. Is this album hot or nah? First things first, this is a 2-disc album. We have a Big K.R.I.T disc and we have a Justin Scott disc. Justin Scott is the birth name of Big K.R.I.T, and Big K.R.I.T is a Mississippi native. He is certainly an old soul. His very southern roots protrude beyond both his musical style and his personality, and it was this homegrown style that he had broken into the game with in 2010 with his debut mixtape K.R.I.T Was Here. From here, he continued to climb the ladder with other underground artists like Smoke DZA, Currency. Wiz Khalifa was an underground artist at the time. This slew of quality music would eventually land him a deal with Def Jam Records. He released another handful of albums through them, but unfortunately nothing really popped off in the way that it probably should have, both in Big K.R.I.T's perspective and in the music label's perspective. So fast forward to 2016, Big K.R.I.T and Def Jam have cut ties. Now in 2017, we are 3 years removed from the Cadillactica album, his most recent outing. But in this time period since the last album, there seems to have been a variety of things taking place in Big K.R.I.T's life. Certainly the gripes that he had had with his label situation and thus the breakup. And he also makes a pretty focused portion of this album dedicated to some depressive struggles that he had gone through, coupled with a battle with alcoholism. That all gets dove into a pretty dense 22-track listing, and like I said, 2 discs split right down the middle, 11 songs on either half. There's a good handful of guest verses and vocals and instrumentation. A lot of the production is handled by Big K.R.I.T, some by DJ Khalil, some by Manny Fresh, but surprisingly enough, the 4 favorite tracks of mine off of this album are ones that don't actually have any guest vocals or verses. And to be honest, choosing 4 tracks was kind of tough. The only reason I actually felt like making a list was just because of the format of this review, and the only reason I put them in a hierarchical order was, again, I had to. Now the reason these guys share the same spot is because they have an overall melody that I found myself returning to again and again and again, having stuck in my head all the time. Both pretty simplistic tracks, and when I dive into either one of them, they're not super profound, but you know, when you think about favorite songs on an album, what's the ones you listen to the most? Moving up a rung on our ladder into the number 3 spot is the song Get Away. This is kind of another case in which a track has an overall tune to it that I take a strong liking to, except in this case it is the hook that just invigorates me. I love this as being sort of an anthem of positivity and focus and knowing one's self-worth. And I love in this hook we have Big K.R.I.T's interpretation of, you know, the old Big Timers track Get Your Roll On. Subenstein, the 4th installment in the My Sub series, a really great series by the way. In my listening to the entirety of this album, I kind of realized that I was favoring the latter half a little bit more, the Justin Scott disc. It's the portion of the album that dives a little bit deeper into the emotion behind the record. But what I found in Subenstein is a major exception to that notion. This was the major highlight off of that first half for me. I had to fix my button. Really, the instrumentation on this thing is nice and heavy, it's sharp, and then the beat change in the second half of the song has a much prettier and glossier finish to it. This song is also another great representation of Big K.R.I.T staying true to himself at every point of his career. Because when you think about it, on this album, he is trying to reinvent himself a little bit, being an independent artist, being removed from the label, and being 3 years out from, you know, his last major project. So this song obviously has to align with the new ideas coming in, but also align with a series of songs that he's been doing that spans over like 5 years of his career. Big K.R.I.T, Manny Fresh, I really don't know what more you could ask for. This song kicks ass. And moving into my number 1 favorite song off of this album, it has to be The Price of Fame. I did really enjoy this particular portion of the record that this song resides in, kind of the latter part of the second disc. K.R.I.T really starts lowering the listener down with him into that very lonely state that he found himself in, or maybe is still in a little bit. On this track specifically, K.R.I.T is discussing the idea of success and fame as he once saw it. And now that he's kind of obtained that success and has realized how hollow it may actually be, I think he's just kind of hashing out the feelings that come up in the midst of coming to grips with that notion. The instrumental, from the little keyboards to the very light guitar picks, just reek of solitude. But really, it's the lyrics here. Being so thoughtful, being so prudent and honest and observant. And all up and down this thing, there are these one-liners that I think really encapsulate a lot of the emotion that goes into this track. But there was one lyric in particular that stood out to me, kind of resonated with me through multiple listens of this project. K.R.I.T is kind of lamenting the fact that when it comes to family and loved ones, that they are now somewhat like fans of his. Instead of being the kind of people whom he can confide in, away from the industry. Instead, for certain members of his family, they're the kind of people who he has to keep the big K.R.I.T mask on for. Anyways, my estimation of this lyric off the top of my head is big K.R.I.T saying that it's almost like being Justin Scott trapped inside of big K.R.I.T, screaming out to people saying it's really me inside. And I think it's this lyric and other astute lyrical moments on this track that really unpack the identity crisis that takes place when we're talking about big K.R.I.T versus Justin Scott. And then following this song up with Drinking Sessions and The Light, we really get a chance as listeners to understand and sympathize with big K.R.I.T's descent into this very vulnerable state. Anyways, in short, for pushing the narrative in a very strong direction and giving me a moment on this track listing that I really felt, this is my favorite song on the album. As for my 3 adjectives to describe this album, I would describe this thing as grandiose, solitary, and spiritual. Because again, we're really getting to see big K.R.I.T's vision here, and he's getting to go all the way with certain things that maybe he wouldn't have been able to on previous projects. And again, like I said, specifically with the second half of this record, it really does go down into that hole of solitude. But it really is the spirituality within big K.R.I.T that allows him to sort of dig himself out of that hole. And on the other side of spiritual, you could certainly describe a lot of big K.R.I.T's projects as spiritual. And it's the adjective that, again, hammers home the idea that no matter what he decides to do or where he decides to go with his sound, and no matter what transpires in his life, big K.R.I.T, the musician and the person, is going to ultimately stay the same. So is this album hot, or is it stupendous? Because it is certainly stupendous. That's going to be it for me today. I love this album. If you have an opinion, I want to hear it. 4 favorite tracks. Do you have 3 adjectives to describe this album? And ultimately, is it hot or is it not hot? Otherwise, that's going to be it from me today. I have been Dev Del Molino. You have been so wonderful for watching, as always. And remember, art without favor is like a windmill without wind. Dev Del Molino.